Welcome and thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Sitecore Watercooler, the casual conversation podcast dedicated to covering all things related to Sitecore, including product updates, implementation insights, getting the most out of your Sitecore investment, and more. I'm your guest host today, Maggie Burke, Sitecore Program Manager and Sitecore MVP at americaneagle.com. The e-commerce ecosystem can be pretty exciting, but also pretty overwhelming. When an organization is faced with multiple decisions from tax calculation to product data storage, you ultimately want to feel confident in the tool that ties that experience together for your customers. Sitecore released their own SaaS product, OrderCloud, which is an API-first headless e-commerce platform. Our team at americaneagle.com has had the opportunity to implement this tool across a few of our clients, and today we will be discussing the importance of adequate planning and just what considerations to make before diving into your OrderCloud implementation. We are joined today by two of our senior Sitecore solution architects, James Gregory and Ahmed Okour, both of which have worked in the Sitecore space for many years and have been very involved with our OrderCloud implementations. James, Ahmed, welcome to the water cooler.
Thanks, Maggie.
Thank you, Maggie.
So kind of going into it, when we talk through OrderCloud implementations, again, they can be pretty extensive, and it's not even just for OrderCloud. This is any sort of e-commerce project that you're going into, because there's a lot of different facets that you want to consider and take into account to make sure that you're adequately planning and articulating what you need before you kind of dive into that implementation. So kicking it over to you guys, what are some of maybe the first areas that you feel like are worth notating and documenting and getting a good sense of even before you dive into some of the more technical pieces of an OrderCloud implementation?
Yes, I think there's a lot to unpack there. Commerce projects themselves are more daunting than just content projects.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we've seen a lot of Sitecore teams that are used to content websites, and that's one thing, but getting into the commerce world is a whole other ballgame. And so there's definitely an adaptation there. As far as planning, I think one big thing for businesses to realize when they're getting into an OrderCloud project is that it's not your typical traditional commerce system. If you have the expectation that you're getting a ready to go kind of like, if you're going to be buying a building, are you getting something that's move-in ready? No, OrderCloud's not like that. OrderCloud is you're ready to do some renovation. So here's your base and you get the best tools you can have to work with, but you're renovating. So it's just a different mindset that you're getting into. So you want to make sure that you're aligned with that mindset. So one of the great things about OrderCloud is that it's very versatile. It is true headless. It's not just like an add-on hoc headless system. It's like it's designed from scratch to be headless, and it can work with any system, a phone app or a website or a kiosk or some hardware scanner, like ticketing system, anything you want to work with. It seamlessly plugs in because that's all the modern mock stack. And so you want to have a good idea of what you're getting yourself into to start with. Know that you're not buying something that's just ready to go. And so with that knowledge, then you're in the right mindset to say, okay, now we got a plan for what we want. And the great thing about OrderCloud is it can adapt very quickly. As you might have heard, it's been designed for the most complicated business scenarios, right? So, it can handle all the marketplace, the franchise. If you want, one store to buy from your network of suppliers, it can model all that for you and go crazy with the sophisticated stuff there, and really in-depth use cases there. Handling all the different roles in the commerce project of, are you a supplier, are you a buyer, are you a reseller, what have you. It's just, you have to have a good idea of what you're wanting to get out of it to start with, I think. And then you can go from there. And then it's just the tedious, outlining of all your different integrations. What are all of your systems, bringing that to the table, having a clear picture of where you're at and a clear picture of where you want to get to with all of your systems, because there's often a lot of time when you're doing an OrderCloud project, it's an opportunity to maybe change your systems, right? Maybe you've got some legacy systems that you want to replace. That's a good time to do it. And so kind of being upfront with all that you have and kind of knowing where you want to go is going to be a great start to a project.
And from my side, also before you start your implementation of the OrderCloud, you need to understand what does it offer. So it's mainly commerce operate functionality.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have things like a content enrichment, your images, your assets, all of that, needs to be part of your commerce website.
Mm-hmm.
That's something you need to plan ahead of where does that exist, because there is no place for languages, content in in OrderCloud, there's no place for assets. Your kind of like your tax calculation, your payment, all of that you have to think ahead of time before you get into the implementation, so that you know the system that you want to integrate with OrderCloud.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great point, because that was one question I was going to ask too, was, dealing with content projects, that's always going to be a large piece of any project, right? And that's just on a content, migration or content website. But that being said, for an e-commerce project, and when you're dealing with OrderCloud, really thinking ahead to understand where do you want that content to live is probably something that's extremely important to take into consideration before you actually start the project. So
yeah, and even within the Sitecore ecosystem, you've got choices of, are you using Content Hub for your content? Are you using Content Hub 1? Are you using XM Cloud? Are you using on-premise XM? So you got a lot of choices there too. And then whichever one you pick, you got to figure out how you want to have the system flow the data. You've got product data in OrderCloud, but then how do you manage that information, kind of having a place to edit that in XM Cloud or somewhere, and how do those talk together? So there's some planning there, technical planning. But the big picture first is just which software do you want to use to go with, and then you start bridging them together.
Wanted to ask you a little bit too about search and kind of search implementation. Is there anything that you guys think that someone should consider also when they're talking about dealing with implementing OrderCloud and then tying that back into some kind of search tool, whether it is using Sitecore Search or any of the other tools that are out there? Is there any considerations, or just, is it really just a matter of wanting to plan out the tool?
With OrderCloud, like recently we implemented Coveo headless on top of that. So basically, you need to understand like where does your content live in. So like now for this implementation, we have content coming from OrderCloud, the description, like the pricing, the variation of the product, and then you have the content that comes from Sitecore XM instance. So you kind of like need to understand like I need to build my own indexer or crawler that extract this data from these systems. It doesn't have to be Coveo, like if you're using Sitecore Search, for example, or like any other search platform. So you need to understand how to crawl this information from, and then how do you want to build your UI with it. With the Coveo headless, it does offer like a lot of like out of the box components for the search, but like the indexing part is pretty on you to implement. But we've done a lot of like customization on that Coveo headless, and it does offer all of the machine learning features, like the product recommendation. People also like viewed. That doesn't come from OrderCloud, so like that, that's coming actually from Coveo headless. It's called the Atomic library from Coveo.
Yeah. In the past couple of years, search has felt kind of isolated from each other between content search and product search. So I'm excited to see, Sitecore has been talking about taking their Sitecore Search and Sitecore Discover and kind of having a solution that brings them together. So I'm excited to see what that's going to look like. And I'm sure Coveo is kind of thinking about similar terms. But right now they've kind of been siloed from each other. And so the dream is to be able to use the journey across product detail pages, across the cart activity, the content and the search, and power those auto suggestions and that relevance ranking together would be the dream someday.
Yeah.
But for now, it's still kind of isolated. We have to have a content search page, a product search page, and have those algorithms separate.
Okay. One other thing too, when it comes, we're talking through, quite a bit of integrations, different kind of pieces that are all talking to each other. Is there anything in particular with like middleware planning that you guys feel like is, important here too? As, we dive into the implementation, any call outs just from a middleware perspective?
I don't think there's any restriction to what you can use with OrderCloud. It's pretty much like, you can plug in anything you want using their middleware, like API, and basically like, whatever like service or like third-party integration tool that you want to use, that you can just use that with OrderCloud easily. Like, I think they're called hooks, or I'm just trying to remember the right term for
hooks.
So you have like different ways to integrate with these systems, and you're free to do anything you want. They don't kind of like define how to like calculate taxes, or how to calculate like even your order, like how to like apply discounts or like run your payment gateway. All of that's something up to you how to use, and then can just plug that in easily. One thing I like about OrderCloud is like there's an XP property. Don't confuse that with the Sitecore XP term. It's just like you can just store any JSON format data that you want to add, like to the product, to the variants, to the order. So like whatever integration that you want to, like from third-party systems, you can just plug that into OrderCloud entity.
I think it is a good distinction, though, that like if you're familiar with traditional Sitecore or Sitecore Commerce before, where at least you had a .NET framework app to extend.
Yeah.
Where now with OrderCloud, you have to plan for, okay, where's that code going to run? Because it's not going to run inside OrderCloud. If you're doing XM Cloud, it's not going to run in XM Cloud. And so you need to bring some other infrastructure to the table, whether it's using Azure Functions or some kind of queue or your own, app that you host somewhere as middleware. And OrderCloud does provide kind of a starter for like a middleware .NET app that you could host somewhere, whether you host it in Azure PaaS or IaaS or somewhere. And you can use, it's .NET Core, right? So it's no longer the framework network, but it's just .NET Core now. So yeah, something to plan for. And that's a great way if you've got a team that's familiar with C#, like that's a great project for them to work on, all the integrations that they're still using what they know, and they get to use that .NET Core flavor. Yeah.
That's a perfect segue too, because then I was going to ask, the team is going to be very important here, right? You want to make sure that you have the right skill set that's going to be able to go into this, knowing what they know, and maybe they're learning some things along the way, but still having the proper skill set to kind of take this to the finish line. So do you guys have any recommendations around proposed team structure or just kind of the team that people should have in place when they're going into an OrderCloud implementation? And this can be more developer specific. Of course, any project should have a strong project manager. You should have strong business analysts that can document, the requirements and things along the way. But just from setting up an implementation project, do you guys have any recommendations around skill sets that would be needed?
So it depends. Like is your team more like comfortable with .NET Core, or like are they like comfortable with headless framework, like like with React, Next.js, all of that? Like we definitely see like more like it's Next.js is more like it's kind of like scalable and it's like have a lot of more benefits than using the .NET Core version of that. But you still like there is an option to use .NET Core with OrderCloud. You can, but you probably have to build like a lot of things from scratch as well.
Right.
If you're going the headless route, you probably recommend to go with Next.js. OrderCloud does have a starter kit, if you can call it, with Next.js. But your team like definitely needs to start like, if they're going to the headless route, they need to start, like it's a completely different mindset when you're developing with React or Next.js than .NET like kind of like mindset. You need to like, probably get some training or like at least like understand how React works, how Next.js, how static site generation works, because that's a very important thing if you're using Next.js. Because with commerce, we always run into like performance issues, and like it's much more computing resource, like the resources that are required for a commerce are much more than just a container website. So with Next.js, you can utilize like the static site generation just to make, cache a lot of things that as much as you can, and then you can do a rehydration later on. But in terms of like team structure, you need to have a fit team that is kind of like knowledgeable about the all of these like JavaScript libraries, React, Next.js, so they can do like the base work for like the UI and everything. And then you're still like your team still have to understand React and Next.js very well, so that they can actually take whatever the fit did for them and then build on top of that. And also like depends on like what integration you're dealing with. So the team also like might if you're going into a commerce implementation, you need to understand like payment gateway, like how to use Stripe or use like CyberSource or use any of these integration.
So it's kind of important to have different integration kind of SMEs on there too, just to help in that regard as well, to add additional context when it comes to those integration pieces.
Because there are just so many options to choose from, and just like if you have someone who's experienced with this kind of like integration, they can give you a lot of like recommendation of what exactly to use, and that can save you a lot of time. For example, like we used a service it's called Shipper HQ. It's like you can set up your entire like shipping rates and rules and all of that. If we were like just to implement this from scratch, just integrate directly with UPS and USPS, that would take us like months to finish. With Shipper HQ, just like literally just a few clicks of on the admin interface, and you just say like, I want UPS, FedEx, and USPS on my website, and
There
voila,
you go.
that's it.
Couple
So
clicks
just
away.
someone like who's expert with this integration can give you a lot of like helpful like recommendations.
Great.
One thing I like about the whole switch to headless realm and like the whole headless ecosystem is there's a lot of things that it has to offer. I mean, you got the static site generation for performance, and you're able to offload a lot of the processing to the client, so the site can be a lot more responsive. And I think one thing that's really nice is like the Vercel and the Netlify, where you can also leverage your hosting and scaling support to another provider. And that really frees up resources from having to deal with infrastructure setup. So you can just focus on the development and get things out the door faster. While you can still kind of do your own hosting for these headless apps, it's not preferred, mainly just because of the timeline and the ease. I mean, Vercel especially, we've been working with a lot lately, and it's just so nice to be able, as a developer especially, to code something, hit a button, and it's up there and running smoothly without having to invest the weeks and months to get the infrastructure set up, and it's able to do some really interesting things where it's got the edge middleware that you can mess with, and it's built in CDN for caching, and just so many tools with a few simple lines. It just really lets you flex some power of like what you can do with the app. And so I definitely recommend going with like a Vercel or Netlify for hosting and count that into your budget, because it just saves a lot of needless, tedious time setting up your own stuff and then having to test it where it's like, hey, it's already smooth and running here.
Great. So talking through a little bit more about that team structure, was there anything from external teams that you guys feel like helped with a lot of the support when it came to these OrderCloud implementations, whether it was Sitecore, Vercel, anybody from that side that you want to touch on?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by kind of voicing, some initial concerns going into a new OrderCloud project, not being familiar with OrderCloud initially. And, being a SaaS platform, there's the concerns of, is it going to perform well? Are there going to be issues that are out of our control? What do we do if something breaks? These kinds of things.
Valid question.
Just to kind of bolster our familiarity with it. And I got to say, I'm very impressed with the OrderCloud product. It's been a great developer experience. Like they've got a really nice dev console that you can go in, and it's like Postman on steroids. It's really slick UI. You can do a lot of stuff there. And I was really impressed by the performance of the platform. Being able to say, hey, we need to just export 5,000 users or export 100,000 products. Like it just cranks through it like nothing. It's just butter. And then, you want to do bulk imports, it's got to take a lot of load, and it handles it really well. So I was very impressed by the performance of it, and really enjoy the developer experience. I mean, it's all the latest and greatest stuff. So it's really pleasure for the developers. But then in working with the platform, a lot of times commerce platforms, it's a lot of nuanced knowledge, and you got to learn the ins and the outs. With OrderCloud, I found it really quick to get up to speed on, because it's all really well defined, and it's pretty transparent in what it's doing, and it's all like just really well defined. So it's like, a product is a product, and you can add to the cart, and like the responsibilities are very clear. And so when something isn't working as expected, it's pretty quick to pinpoint kind of where it's at. And then when it is something where it's like, oh, it seems like it's something weird or something I don't understand that's happening in OrderCloud, the support team has just been phenomenal. I mean, they don't have like tickets like the Sitecore tickets. It's just an open Slack channel that you subscribe to the channel, and you can just talk directly to the support team. And at least for now, the support team is the developers too. So they've got like really good knowledge on everything. And so yeah, they're just very quick to respond. I can't say enough about that support team. It's been an incredible resource for us. Yeah.
And I do have one good example of like, that we had with the support team from OrderCloud. So like we had this integration with Azure B2C, and we needed something to like include in the parameter we were sending to Azure B2C. And that wasn't something possible through the integration that comes out of the box with OrderCloud. So like we were just chatting with them on the Slack, and they were sort of, yeah, this makes sense. We're gonna add it in the next release. And like a week later, it was already like added, and I was able to just use it. And there's no code changes, just like configuration, and just like it's a SaaS product, so it just you're running on the latest version. So
yeah, their timeline of releases is something that's amazing. Like they don't have like a far future roadmap. They do like agile sprints, like every couple
Right.
weeks they're growing through stuff. And so, yeah, like we come up with something that's like, it'd kind of be nice to have automatic promotions. And then a few weeks later, you got automatic promotions. It's just like all these features. Oh, we got these weird products where it'd be nice to have like a parent product, child relationships. Okay, it's released now.
Yeah.
And so the way they can develop the core product so quickly has been phenomenal as well.
And that's the nice part about it being a SaaS product too, right? To your point, like it's not like they make a change and then we have to implement some sort of hot fix or change to it or anything like that. The change just gets rolled out in the next release. So it's there. So that's the nice part about moving.
And they've been very good that the releases that they roll out don't break things.
Yeah.
It's been pretty
That's always helpful, right? Very exciting. Great. So as we kind of wrap things up, I want to talk to you guys just in your experience. You guys have both been on large OrderCloud implementations. What is probably the most critical thing in your opinion, or most critical component to starting out an OrderCloud implementation?
I'll take it from the context of like a business buying it, or kind of from the business case coming into it. What can they look for? I think understanding that OrderCloud is different than a lot of other e-commerce platforms out there. That its core market is probably the really complex cases. Like if you can't find a platform to do something, this one will do it for you. So it definitely has its strengths towards the complex, but to help bridge the cost, to bring down the cost for someone that maybe just has a more typical scenario. I think you'd probably want to align yourself with a vendor that can give you a jump start, because that can save you months of initial setup, like not setup time, but like just hey, we need to have a cart, we need to have a checkout process, we need to have a dashboard app for customer service to look at stuff, just some kind of bare essentials. While there is a head start out there for Angular, that might not be your tech stack, so you might need to bring something else in. And so, that could be 6 weeks, it could be 6 months just to kind of get those core essentials in place. And so if you can find a vendor that has something available, you just save 6 months of time and money. So now you can get focused on what you really want to develop on off of that. I think that could be a good jumpstart to look for.
And that's the nice piece too, right? Is that because we've kind of gone through this already, we have a lot of that kind of starter kit framework already set up. So it's just going to make OrderCloud implementations even smoother going into the future. So,
no, just like James mentioned, like like if you have a vendor that have that jumpstart, like kind of like solution that can just the initial like functionality, just like assemble like checkout to work and add to cart. And on top of that, if you have something like content enrichment, because like I said, that doesn't exist. So if you're already on Sitecore and you want to use OrderCloud with it, so like, like if there is a solution for just like a connector. So for example, with Sitecore Commerce, that connector already existed before, but with OrderCloud, even though it's a Sitecore product, it doesn't really know what's going on with the Sitecore XM. Mm-hmm. So like, having a connector that just bridges the two, it can save you a lot of time.
James, Ahmed, thank you guys for joining us on the water cooler today. I really appreciate the insight from both of you and look forward to further collaborating with you guys in the future. And we really hope to have you guys back on the water cooler again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again to James Gregory and Ahmed Okour for joining us today on the Sitecore Water Cooler podcast, a casual conversation between colleagues and peers centered around all things Sitecore. I'm your guest host, Maggie Burke, and until next time we meet at the water cooler, be sure to subscribe to the Sitecore Water Cooler podcast today wherever you find your podcasts. This episode is brought to you by americaneagle.com studios with special thanks to executive producers Renee Nelson, Julia Klepich, and Brian Winger.